Millions of years in the past, long before Earth became the apple of God's eye, the stars were still teeming with life. As the all-powerful creator of existence, God created many worlds and countless creatures to inhabit them. Each planet contained a morsel of his own essence, and each planet contained peoples dedicated to worshipping and glorifying their creator through prayers, rites, and rituals. Across all of space-time, the infinite worlds of God's universe sang out glorious hymns of his power, thanking him for all that was good and all that was grand. The splendor and beauty of all these things were indescribable in their grandeur and unknowable in their scale. Trillions upon trillions of beings bowed to the great expanse and thanked God for the blessings he bestowed upon them. Upon each planet, the story was told a bit differently, but the core concepts were the same. In his infinite wisdom, God created infinite life, stretching from one end of an unending, ever-expanding cosmos to the other, all as the product of his infinite and boundless love. If one could travel 1 trillion miles in any direction, this was not even a twinkling in his eye, not even a centimeter to the Creator. From his seat in heaven, the infinite abode of the infinite Godhead, Jehovah watched over all he had wrought, over all he had, in his infinite wisdom, seen fit to produce from nothingness. Some planets he created using an evolutionary-type process of slow biological improvement, while others were snapped into existence, fully developed, and in less than a blink of an eye. Even on planets that had not yet seen truly intelligent life, as Earth would be before Adam, the cries and bleats and howls of the animals were a beautiful chorus of praise to the grand architect, to he who gave them life. And in this time before time, there were helpers for the Creator, those who he had created firstmost. These were the angels, who frequently took on bipedal forms in the image and likeness of their God, but were initially forged as spinning wheels of eyes and wings. Of these angels, there were none so powerful and trusted in his sight as the archangels Michael, Gabriel, and Lucifer. This trinity of beings worked for the glory and power of the triune God, and did his will across the universe, an infinite eternity serving the creator of existence. For millions upon millions of centuries, joy and happiness ruled the stars. And during this time before time, millions of Earth years in the past, God created a new form of beings called the Leviathans. These creatures were not angels, but were made in his image, given enormous supernatural power and energy, and were presented the task of tending to God's astronomical gardens. Many Leviathans were so dedicated and so devout in their task and worship, as sector guardians, so loving and mindful of those they were trusted with protecting and nurturing, that they were allowed to ascend. When they ascended, they were transfigured into angels themselves. Israfil the armorer, for one, rose to become the caretaker of heaven's weapons and defenses. During the Zildin heresy, a group of neighboring planets rose up against God and declared that they would conquer heaven. These people began worshipping their own galactic High King as a deity and offered their sacrifices to him, including their young spawn. Zazanak the Scorekeeper, the Leviathan in charge of this galaxy, was given the task by God of punishing these mortals for their abhorrent rejection of good. He was joined by Leng, the oldest and most beautiful of all the Leviathans. Leng was the messenger, and it was with him that God relayed messages to the Leviathan host. Now Leng the messenger, like most all of the beings created by God, had free will. Like other Leviathans, Leng dreamed of the day when he would finally ascend to the ranks of the angels. But as eons passed into eternity, he grew more and more fearful that that day would never come. Surely, he schemed, if he could show how dedicated he was in this mission with Zazanak, he would impress God and ascend at last. Zazanak dealt with the heretics with mercy and honor. The infants and deficient were spared, as were those who resisted the High King and loved God, for there were still many of his children who were loyal. But while Zazanak moved with purpose and grace, Leng moved quickly and brutally. Rocks fell from the skies, water turned black and fetid, and the women and children, even in the temples of God, were crushed. The High King's galactic army was no match for either Leviathan, and most knelt before Zazanak at his first appearance and begged for forgiveness. After much sacrifice and prayer, many were allowed to live, but Leng offered no chance for redemption. And as the soldiers of the High King cowed before him, refusing to even fight back, he unleashed his incredible psychic and telekinetic powers upon them, driving them mad and warping their minds until they burst like huge pustules. Leng delighted in scorching their planets into lifeless husk worlds unfit for any life. God knew, of course, of Leng's brutality as soon as it occurred, and it brought him deep pain and sorrow. He could listen to prayers and manage the universe perfectly on his own, but he created angels and leviathans to share his love and purpose with others, and to be able to glorify themselves by glorifying him. And never should a being be exterminated without a chance of redemption, of returning to his flock, and he summoned Leng the messenger to the throne. Expecting to be rewarded, Leng immediately praised and thanked his God, his creator, and said that all he had done was in his name. Disgusted, God rendered him unable to move, unable to speak, and revealed the wrathful side of himself that he always sought so hard to let go unseen. Instead of promoting Leng, instead of praising him as a good and faithful servant, God told him what he had done was against the very essence of God's will and plan for all life. Shocked and horrified, Leng felt his voice return, and he begged for forgiveness and another chance, a second chance unlike what he offered to the heretics. Leng secretly began to feel hate in his heart as he watched Gabriel, Michael, and Lucifer stand to the side, gazing blankly on as the Lord of Hosts condemned his actions. He only wanted to be like them. He deserved to be like them. He would ascend, one way or another, he insisted to himself. Now God saw fit to give Leng a second chance, even though Leng had not bestowed such mercy to those trusted in his own care. He would become the sector guardian of the planet Tosora and its surrounding stars. If he governed with tolerance, compassion, and respect, he would earn himself back the good graces of Jehovah. To most Leviathans, this would be a simple task, one done with joy and love. But Leng was hardening his heart against God and against good. For 1,000,000 years, Leng served as the sector guardian, steering what he was coming to view as God's little lab rats along, ushering in age after age of new generations of worshippers. These worshippers would die and ascend to heaven and become favorites of God. While these roaches, these insects, these short-lived wastrels rejoiced in the company of God, Leng had to stand watch for 10,100 centuries. Finally, his spirit began to snap, and he began to bring pestilence and undeserved tribulations to these decent beings. He began to use diseases to engineer mutations in what God had made, rendering these people sickly and mentally deficient, but also near immortal. By the time they had seen 30 Earth years, these poor folk were ready to die, but they would live on in a miserable stasis state for millennia. God dispatched Gabriel and Lucifer to Tosora to deal with Leng. Once he had been considered for ascendancy, and had been tragically far closer than he had thought himself to be, but now a heavenly warrant was issued to punish him in a fitting and just manner for his sadism and cruelty. He had scorned God's second chance, and now he would suffer the full consequences of his freely chosen actions. When Gabriel and Lucifer arrived and held out the scroll of banishment, showing it to the renegade Leviathan, Leng cried out not in fear or sorrow, but in rage. He was done with these beings, who were far more blessed and loved than he, be they angels or the peons he was supposed to be guarding. The despotic messenger of God attempted to use a psychic blast against the archangels, but even this greatest power of his was no match for them. As Gabriel read the scroll, forever forbidding Leng from entering heaven again, Lucifer easily grabbed Leng by his neck. This sent an Enochian shockwave through Leng's system, causing his eyes to explode from within. After the reading of the scroll was complete, Lucifer dismembered the being formerly known as Leng by plucking off his limbs and melting his once beautiful face. Lucifer hurled the now nameless, whimpering, pathetic creature into the outer darkness of empty space. For 1,000,000 lifetimes, the faceless one flew through a vast expanse of nothingness, his once heavenly and now limbless body distorting and contorting into a horrific serpentine form. One could travel blindly for eternity without touching so much as an asteroid. Such was and is the vastness of space. For a short time, the disgusting creature wailed and begged Jehovah for the forgiveness he had not granted others. But God knew him not, and closed his ears to such cries. The sadistic former messenger of God now floated as blind as one could be in the cold, dark, empty expanse of eternity. An eternity without God and without love itself. So much occurred in this time of cosmic isolation. God created the earth, the apple of his eye. Lucifer himself rebelled and was cast out during the war in heaven. Mankind was created in the image and likeness of God, and through their free will mankind fell to sin, depravity and war. And so it was that in what earth historians would know as the early Bronze Age, a depraved and wicked Assyrian sorcerer known as Ashur-Rabi conducted experiments of telekinesis and psychic power to earn the respect of his earthly king. Calling upon all sorts of demonical spirits and out into the cosmos, the sorcerer used ritual sacrifices and cursed spells taught to him by Nephilim to cast a wide net into the spiritual realm. The Faceless One answered back, claiming to be a god that would bring great blessing to the Assyrian people if prayers were offered up to him. They called him Father Dagon. And through their combined efforts and prayers, the one-time messenger of God hurtled through space, blind but drawn to their psychic energy. Through his psychic contact, the Faceless One learned of Earth, of Lucifer's fall, of the teeming hordes of unwashed and unrepentant sinners and occultists. Yes, the creature thought, this Earth held promise. When the repugnant being arrived, like an invisible shockwave of supernatural thunder, the oceans rose and the mountains trembled. Worshippers and cultists praised the name of this serpent god who spoke to them in dreams and whispers in their minds. In North America, tribes began to worship the feathered serpent. In Africa, the most remote peoples sang songs about the arrival of a great python they called the Eyeless King. Dagon continued to be worshipped in Assyria and was known as Enlil in Mesopotamia. As the warriors of ancient Israel created the Holy Land, murmurs were heard of pale European Gentiles worshipping a great serpent known as Jormungandr, the World Eater. All these sects and cults seemed to believe that a colossal worm-like deity resided in the Earth's core, turning the entire planet into a form of nest or stasis pod. In its state of pseudo-hibernation, the Faceless One regained some strength and sapped the psychic energy of its cultists. Century upon century, worship of the being continued in some form. By the Middle Ages, it was growing more powerful. Legendary 11th century Italian alchemist Alessandro Abeti of Rome, who claimed to be the physical incarnation of the mythical figure Hermes Trismegistus, to his small group of devotees, published several dark works, while supposedly in contact with an entity that he referred to as the Crowned and Conquering King. Among these were such chestnuts as the Book of Lost Covenants, the Principles of Ruin, and the Names of Phantoms. But around 1066, the year of the Norman invasion of England under William the Conqueror, Abate was ferreted out of the ruins of the great Colosseum, and he and his followers arrested for sorcery and heresy. As they sat in the darkest dungeon, Abate went to work on his next masterpiece, a tome that would become known as the Vermis Mysteries, or Mysteries of the Worm. Not given any writing materials in his cell, Abate took to catching rats, skinning them, singeing off the hair with candles, and slowly turning their skins into a form of vellum paper, which he bound with his own hair. For a pen he used various bones and detritus, and for ink, a mixture of rat blood and his own bodily fluid. The book was exceedingly blasphemous in its nature, and nearly unspeakable in its contents. Other prisoners avoided him more and more as the book neared completion and the day of his execution drew nearer. At last, one night, Abate claimed his great work was done, and that all glory from his wretched tome should go to the Crowned and Conquering King. The night before his execution, the book mysteriously disappeared from his cell. The next morning, as he stood facing the pyre on which he would be executed, he began to laugh and behave as if possessed by some dark entity. He flung guards and soldiers left and right, all while cackling about, seeing at last.
For 100,000 lifetimes I have been blinded, but now I see. I see the folly of God's handiwork again in this pitiful place of whore masters and false prophets. Throw me in the flames if you can, for this meat means nothing to me. I shall come into another as but a change of clothing. Kill me if you dare! But first, Let me have my entertainment this day.
After many deaths and broken bones, the sorcerer's body collapsed with a dozen crossbow bolts through it, with 2 through the heart. There was no reason the old man should have been able to bear such abuse and still breathe, let alone send trained Roman soldiers hurtling through walls and scaffolding. The church hushed up the matter, and most who bore witness to the possession seemingly agreed to never discuss the events again. The only written record of this matter is laid down in the Historia Vermis Cultus, the history of the worm cult, of which only 2 copies would exist by the 19th century. One was held in Oxford University Library, and another was kept in the secret library deep within the Vatican vaults.
Gormanganda, o mundi comidentis, o pater Dagon, o iunus unus, coronata et victrix rex ia exaudi preces nostras, ostendat nobis formido tua veram potentiam, et vigilas et reges hunc mundum eternus et umquam, ia, Jormungandr, O world eater, O Father Dagon, O faceless one, the crowned and conquering king, ia, hear our prayers. May your dread form show us true power, and may you awaken and rule this world forever and ever. The Wormist Prayer, as written in the Ritus Communia Vermis Day, Common Rites of the Godworm, 1478.
As the Middle Ages rolled into the Renaissance, and the Church's stranglehold on society began to wane in much of Europe, interest in the Vermis Mysteris grew and grew. Through its sinister mutterings in the night to willing ears, to its cultists assembling in the forests and caves to beckon its awakening, the Faceless One gained strength. In 1492, the same year as Columbus's fateful and blundering voyage, the worm cult began to unite around a central figure for the first time since Abate's execution centuries earlier. Oudin Le Cerf, a French speaker living in the Holy Roman Empire, was chased out of the Rhineland Palatinate by witch hunters, and he was accompanied in this flight by no less than several dozen cultists. These acolytes were willing to fight to the death to defend him and the ancient original copies of Abate's work that he had procured through unknown means. Le Cerf had been promised by the worm that he would be given immortality in exchange for doing his will. For his service to the slumbering titan, Oudin Le Cerf would be shown the full extent of dark power and black magic, and the boon of eternal life would be his. From a new base in southeastern England, in a small fishing hamlet called Innsmouth, Le Cerf and his cultists chanted strange prayers and performed heinous acts daily, begging and pleading for the worm to awaken from its slumber. Le Cerf one night was possessed by the spirit of the worm to some degree and disappeared deep into a cave system. There, he supposedly encountered an ethereal being who embraced him in a whirling vortex of dark energy. Le Cerf became the first true vampire, functionally immortal as long as a steady supply of psychic energy could be had. Through a ritual taught to him by the being in the cave, he could render certain of his followers into vampires as well. Simply biting or feeding off the psychic energy of a person was not enough to turn them, but rather it was essential that the thrall be willing and eager, and certain rites had to be performed. This led to the creation of Le Cerf's blasphemous 13 disciples. They roamed across the world exploring, recruiting other cultists, and bringing glory to the worm's name. However, they all agreed that the number of vampires should remain at 13 to secure their power and hold over their apprentices and followers. They were only useful until one unlocked immortality. They could then be thrown away like used toys. The only exception was to be if one of their number should perish somehow, a new vampire would be created to take the place of the fallen. But Le Cerf was not satisfied, and as decades grew into centuries, he felt somewhat bored with this now old-hat immortality. He wanted supreme power, and he wanted to become the physical vessel itself of the worm, just as Abate had. During the 7 Years' War, known in America as the French and Indian War, the cultists hired themselves out to the French, scalping and feeding on British caravans, settlers, and soldiers. These invincible mercenaries simply used the job to bring coin into the coffers of the cult and to provide luxuries and increasingly effective equipment. Some of the disciples began to mutter about using their powers and money to create a dominion of our own in North America. Surely, even if the whole world united against them, They could not fail. But Lesurf warned them that the time was not yet right, and the worm demanded further service. As the disciples began to formulate a plan to dispose of Lesurf, his days became drenched in paranoia. Only one vampire, since their creation, had been killed. A Frenchman named Lambertus Lajoie had, in 1666, been living in their European hub of Innsmouth when a group of Puritans had accused him of devil worship, a most serious charge at the time. A silver rapier sword drenched in holy oil had been run through his chest and the body burned. The first victim of the Innsmouth Brethren Puritan band that would make hunting them and worm cultists their careers and would expand far beyond England. Lajoie was replaced by Englishman Seth Swan. Although it scalded their hands to even hold, the disciples acquired such a rapier and a bottle of oil blessed by a priest and began to discuss where they should betray their grandmaster. On October 31, 1776, as Lesurf came into the stone circle in their moose factory headquarters to pray, the disciples surrounded him, and he knew what they planned to do.
Fools, deceivers, I know of what you plan to do, for I have long suspected your disloyalty, and long have I read your thoughts. I now invoke the crowned and conquering king to inhabit my form, as I have long prayed in fever-soaked nights of ritual and rite, and I will destroy this entire group of cack-handed jackals, and start afresh with those who know their places. Ear, O Father Dagon, bring me victory, for I am worthy of becoming your eternal abode. Grandmaster Udin Lesurf.
After a moment, Lesurf began to convulse violently and flail his limbs like a rag doll. His eyes rolled to the back of their sockets. His very blood vessels seemed to pulse and almost glow underneath his pale skin, like a creature all of their own burrowing through his body. He swatted at the ranks of deceivers, sending the vampires flying through the air. With no effort whatsoever, he grabbed the Russian who called himself Eldon Dantalian, the disciple he had trusted most, and used his bare hand to crush his skull in. Immortal, Dantalian hit the ground like a sack of rocks, experiencing pain unlike any that could be imagined as his flesh and bone began the rapid process of healing. As the others rushed him and tried to run him through with the silver sword, Grandmaster Lesurf howled and unleashed a burst of visible psychic energy from his white eyes, severing Andre Andras's legs from his body and sending the rapier tumbling to the ground. The entire ground was shaking by this point, and the stones of the prayer circle were falling to the damp earth like they weighed almost nothing. Irishman Murphy Vere found himself partially crushed under one of the stones, all while Lesurf beat his face in with his bare hand. When Ahab Abraxas attempted to push Lesurf away from Vere, the possessed Grandmaster merely laughed demonically before unhinging his jaw unnaturally wide. He began to gorge himself on the Welshman, like a python devouring a mouse, before spitting the bloodied, mangled, immortal mess of Abraxas out with violent force. Abraxas sailed high into the air before being dashed on the ground like a bug, all while he destroyed his disciples over and over for their disloyalty, constantly sparing them just short of actual death. The power which he had so long sought was beginning to overwhelm and overheat his body. His vessels became bulged and black. His nose, eyes, and ears bled like a fountain, and his limbs seemed like they were going to blow off of his trunk. At last, after nearly 2 hours of insane battle, the Grandmaster of the worm cult began to wax thin. As the plotters all lay destroyed and beaten, Lesurf could be seen staggering in the moonlight, blood vessels bursting all over his body. But he spoke one final time, not in his own voice, but in the sickening charnel voice of the creature once known as Leng, messenger of God.
Never doubt my power as your crowned and conquering king, and never attempt to betray me or my prophets again. This isn't about your inconsequential lives nor your trivial baubles and piles of coins. This is about a new era, one in which I shall reign forever over this wretched planet. This battle was good fun, but this vessel is not worthy of me. When I am ready to appear, you shall know the time, and you shall rejoice, lest I strike you all down with furious anger. So let it be written.
At that, the head of Udin Lesurf exploded like a shrapnel shell on a battlefield, flecking the blades of grass and all the flowers of the meadow with his black blood. As the sun dawned, the battered vampires pieced themselves back together, quite literally, and crawled back to their lodge. There they agreed to never again let any one man become cult grandmaster. No one vampire should possess the knowledge and power that Le Cerf did for so long. They proclaimed themselves the Vampire Lords, and wrote a charter that stated no new vampires would be created, nor would they attempt to invoke the worm again, for they were very afraid.
Hi everyone. This is intended to be the preface, or setup, for a crazy new weird fiction alternative history mashup series called Black Spires. Please like and subscribe for more content, and tell me what you think down in the comments. Until next time, I love you all. May the spooky be with you. That was cringe, but I'm gonna keep saying it.